Agus míle fáilte roimh go dtí an chéad seminar de chuid seminar an Airg agus há clár áing ar fad going le amach an chéad rud bhhaile marrá. Ná go bhfuil agrán uair we have a new edition of Bascna about to be published. This is issue 12, so it's quite an achievement really to have this what started off as a postgraduate journal now in its 12th issue. So we have lots of interesting articles here. I won't maybe say too much about that today, except to say that the very first contributor to the very first issue of Bascna is going to be speaking tonight. That is Dr. Clíona O'Carroll. So we're delighted to have Clíona here this evening. I don't know, are you aware of it, but you can actually access Bascna now online. If you go to the EBSCO repository, you can go in there and just scrolling down, you'll see, I should probably mark this a little bit better, but you can see UK and Ireland Reference Centre in here. And we're delighted that the last few numbers of Bascna are actually available in there, and we're hoping to digitise the whole entire series and to have them all available up there. But the last few are up there for you presently. And I've just typed in Bascna, as you see, into the search box there, just something simple in there. And you can see that the articles from recent editions are coming up there. And then you have access to the full PDF in there. So it's a great development for the journal, brings it to a much wider scholarly audience. We're delighted about it to have this available to all of you. And I see some contributors up here, Sheila and Ken, and others, I mentioned Fiona, that have contributed over the years to Bascna. And so you might spread the word that we have issue 12 coming coming on into a shop near you soon enough. And you might spread the word amongst your students, that we'd love to have articles submitted for consideration for the journal for future issues. So to be a partner to us to maintain the wonderful relationship that we've had with the various different departments within the school going forward, and to develop the journal and, as I say, bring it to a wider scholarly audience in time. So that's enough about Bascna for a moment. You'll hear plenty more about it, I'm sure, in the coming weeks. I just wanted to mention this as well. Dr. Kevin Murray, who has very kindly joined us there now. This was circulated only in the last day or two. It's a seminar that's to be run by the Department of Early and Medieval Irish here at UCC. A one-day seminar on the cycles of the kings, which, unless new restrictions emerge, will take place live in the CAC seminar room, the O'Reilly building over here, on Friday the 8th of April, beginning at 10 o'clock a.m. There will be no cost to attend the seminar, but they do ask, however, that those intending to be present physically would email Kevin at k.murray@ucc.ie. And the seminar will go on Microsoft Teams as well, so the link will be circulated before the event and will be available on the department website in due course. So that's something to put into your diaries. Very, very interesting seminar there, full-day seminar on the cycles of the kings. So here we are this evening at Hardy. We're at our first talk in the seminar, in the spring series of this seminar, School of Irish Learning. And I'm delighted that we have three speakers actually this evening, because the series started back in, was it maybe September or October, that we had our first talk. It was October, I believe. And we again had three wonderful speakers that evening, Professor John Carey and Dr. Kevin Murray, and also Patrick O'Mahon from the School of Modern Irish, or from the Department of Modern Irish. So we have three speakers again this evening, which mirrors that wonderfully. And as I said, we're delighted to have Clíona because she contributed to the very first edition of Bascna way back in the day, 2002. She was only 12 or something like that. And we have James Furey here as well, wonderful former scholar in our department who has gone out to do wonderful things with the Cork Folklore project and other places. and Beth Brint also, who joins us from pathology here at UCC. So just to maybe to say a few words about this presentation this evening, it's called Catching Stories, Oral Testimony of Infectious Disease and Public Health in Ireland. So Catching Stories is an online social history resource focused on infectious disease in Ireland in the 20th and 21st centuries. Here, oral testimony and family memory are brought together with an immunologist's perspective in a multimedia exploration of diseases such as measles, polio, and tuberculosis, and public health initiatives to combat them. Prior to embarking on a 12-month project building on the pilot resource, the project team of Clíona O'Carroll of Belgius, James Furey, Catching Stories researcher, and Beth Brint of Pathology, APC Microbiome Ireland, will discuss the work so far, plans for the future, and questions that arise regarding the meaningful use of oral testimony in such a context. So, for the default, I give them she has to see it. So, very much.
Gurmila Mahat Hiran agus Bavala Buerfagol, Le Christe, Agarha Seminar na Scola, is Kuch Ahastoing on Togasha her Ilaher, in Yov Agus Madeira Thresh Leistach, number Rish Thresh Winu Bliana Hoop. So thanks very much for having us today. And I'm just going to come out of here. Kieran, I'm in your account, but I'll come back in again. We're all well used to this dance. Yeah. Oh no, not at all. Slideshow. From current slide. Oh, Gamla scale. Rasherish. So, today, after briefly giving some context on folklore work relating to health and on the work of the Cork Folklore Project, myself, Beth Brint, and James Furey would like to introduce a resource that brings together oral testimony of infectious disease with an immunologist's perspective. We'll talk a bit about the development of a pilot resource with the support of an IRC New Foundations grant and from the CAC's Interdisciplinary Research Fund, and about an array of potential directions in which it might develop with the support of SFI funding for public scientific engagement. It's all about oral testimony of experiences of infectious disease and of public health initiatives in Ireland in the 20th and 21st centuries. And its context of creation is really in the realm of folklore and ethnology, oral history, cultural heritage. But first, a bit of background on the folklore health intersection. So numbers of folklorists have, down through the years, been looking at the role of rumour and legend and other folklore-related phenomena that structure discourse around biomedical knowledge and affect people's decision-making and experiences in the sphere of health. 2004, Diane Goldstein drew attention to the role of vernacular forms in the placing of health information in a cultural context, with regard to HIV/AIDS in this case, bringing narrative to the fore in examining the relationship between the relationship of narrative with risk perception and behaviour. Folkloristics has a track record in critical engagement with the construction and mediation of biomedical knowledge. Charles Briggs and Andrea Kita particularly have interesting things to say about the tracking of the traditionalization of communicative forms and content within, say, vaccine and medical discourse. Actually, Briggs there should be 2020 at the bottom, I see here. Where rumour and legend and personal experience narratives or testimony are mobilised and shared through word of mouth or digitally, and operate with regard to a larger backdrop of a whole complex of legend and belief, varying belief stances, and contestation and negotiation of the nature of what counts as evidence, what counts as medical knowledge. Kita's insight into vaccine hesitancy resonates with those of medical humanists and anthropologists. It's an area we don't have time to explore here in any detail. But for example, in the case of vaccinations such as measles, which made a comeback in this century in Europe and North America due to falling vaccination rates, materials circulating through simultaneously traditionalized and digitally mediated channels can play a decisive role in tipping the balance of vaccine uptake into levels that don't support herd immunity. In parallel, actors and different kinds of knowledges are empowered or disempowered in healthcare settings and contexts through authority and power structures that are in part narratively constructed. And Charles Briggs here particularly engages critically with these processes through long-term ethnographic work. Stories matter in health, in politics, in life generally. In a slightly different but not unrelated area, computational folkloristics. Anybody in this room know that that was a thing? The colleagues there have developed a macroscopic approach to narrative analysis that facilitates the analysis of how conspiracy theories form, incorporate imminent narratives, are transmitted and developed and sometimes collapse in on themselves. Their rationale for mobilizing folkloristic understanding in this way is that some narratives can lead to action, which can be violent and anti-democratic in their words. And of course, we've recently witnessed how choices and actions regarding mask use and vaccination for COVID-19 have been influenced worldwide by competing narratives that are often transmitted in vernacularized form. Forms that folklorists would recognize, I suppose, as genres that they've been thinking about for decades. We can stay close to home, though, and change the time frame and see areas where folklore studies can illuminate complex relationships between talk and health. And I was reminded of this at a lunch with a visiting colleague recently. To pick just one example, fairy lore and changeling narratives, where any one narrative, saying, comment, or story exists first and foremost against the backdrop of a host of other lore, which forms an imaginative resource that upon which people draw in order to have conversations, sometimes about bad luck, physical or mental health issues, loss, high rates of maternal and infant mortality, and sometimes recovery from ills. Not that often, though, unfortunately. Regardless of the belief status of individuals, certain stories may be mobilized in order to intimate or say something about community members, whether that be to cast aspersions on mental health or to flag difference, or to talk about phenomena that the community don't have the vocabulary for, perhaps, or that the community wishes to avoid direct discussion of, such as sketched out in this particular chapter, congenital conditions, disability, or even infanticide in the case of child changeling narratives. Lore may be mobilized in complex ways with regard to family tensions and the taking of violent action, or explored, as Monroe does in this chapter, as folk articulations of phenomena such as household trauma and failure to thrive. And with the latter, failure to thrive, she makes a very strong case that at a time when the medical sciences had not yet become capable of apprehending it as a phenomenon at all, much less of making sense of it, folk narrative tradition was bearing witness to the complexity of human interactions, tensions, and relationships that can be central to childhood or infant failure to thrive. So I skipped through all of this, I suppose, just to barely scratch the surface of how the discipline of folklore is eminently suited to making a contribution in thinking about meaning making and the complex relationships between narrative, belief, communication, discourse, being, and action in the field of health as much as anywhere else. So back to today, I will briefly introduce the work of the Cork Folklore Project super quickly. I've chosen this particular CFP banner as the three main Catching Stories researchers happen to be in it by accident, and also in the middle on the top, John Kelleher, who's the first voice who will hear from the resource. There's more text on the upcoming slides than I'll discuss for the interested quick readers and for anybody watching in recorded form. The Cork Folklore Project was set up in 1996, deliberately off campus in a community of disadvantage, which didn't at the time have strong or many links to the university. There are 5 to 9 researchers working half-time at any one time under the auspices of community employment and other schemes, and a half-time manager at the Moss Conmara. And our partners, you can see there, are Northside Community Enterprises and the Department of Social Protection. Audio interviewing is at the core of what we do. Our archives contain a wide range of material, up on the screen there, with audio collection at its core. And the audio collection can be partially explored in our online catalogue, which James Furey, of which James Furey was the main architect. We engage in slow methodologies and often quite diffuse place-based inquiry. And it's building up at this stage after 25 years to a very interesting time depth. So we deal in talk. We collect it, we disseminate it, we safeguard it. And it's the specificity of that medium and the fact that taking it on its own terms or giving it its due goes against most established representational conventions within academia and within the public sphere that leads to all sorts of interesting challenges and opportunities. And we'll come back to some of them a little bit later. I should mention some other roles that the project has as a community facilitator and as a troublemaker. We support others, we link people up, and we also stir things up in terms of questioning who the community might be. Some of our dissemination here down through the years in publications, broadcast, collective listening events, an online mapping project, and we also attempt, resources allowing, to document our practice in a way that might be helpful to others. And this is a guideline document that Penny Johnston here put together way back as a PhD student as a way of sharing what we had learned about using particular cultural heritage platforms and as guidelines to other small organizations that mightn't have good technical resources. I'll draw your attention now to a sister project of Catching Stories, our Chronicles of COVID-19 collection project. I'm skipping along here at a great rate because we do want to get to the main topic, but just to give you an idea, this project was centered around questionnaires circulated during the pandemic. We were surprised at the strong articulations of immediate benefit that contributors to the questionnaires expressed. And another thing to note might be that community partners came on board, used the questionnaires in their own initiatives. We also became very aware during this project of how the pandemic was bringing direct or family memories of past pandemics and epidemics up for people. So we have ingested some of this material into the Catching Stories platform, and really we regard this as a sister project. Another sister project that's supporting Catching Stories strongly is a collaboration with the HSE on oral history of healthcare contexts, which has run since 2017 on Dorthopedic, which is now St. Mary's Primary Care Centre, but may always be Dorthopedic for many people, and also since 2019 on the Grattan Street Dispensary, and this project is led by Kieran Murphy of the Cork Folklore Project. So finally, I could leave you with this, which is a little bit dry. So what we'll do is we'll swap out and I'll bring up the Catching Stories website, and while I'm doing that, I'll invite Dr. Beth Brint immunologist up to say a few words on the genesis of this particular project.
Thanks, Clíona. We haven't planned this, so I don't quite know what I'm supposed to say.
Oh, come on over here so that the teams, people are on Teams so that they can.
Oh,
yes, hear you.
yes. I'll just stand next to you then.
Mhm.
Okay, so I think it sums it up for interdisciplinary research as to how uncomfortable I feel with what Clíona presented. In fact, I felt that if she could just bring up that computational folklore 6-page again, I'd be way, way happier and in my comfort zone. Yes, I'm an immunologist, so we've been having great fun during the pandemic. My field of research is really basic immunology. So what am I doing here? Clíona and I have known each other for quite a long time, as was probably from when she wrote that first article for Biologist, to be honest. And we were sitting one day having a chat and discussing a number of things. And one of the things that popped up, I'm familiar with her field of research, and I said, it was at the time, it was all pre-pandemic. And it was at the time that the measles vaccination rate was dropping dramatically. And we were watching explosive numbers in West Cork and Kerry of measles cases. And as an immunologist, that's not what we want to see. And also I was very busy writing letters to the Irish Times at the time about the HPV vaccine uptake. And because that was way down. And, you're banging your head against a brick wall at the time. Now, everything is a bit different now in light of COVID-19. So put yourselves back in that space for a little bit. And I sat there and I said, Clíona, the problem as far as I can see it is that nobody really remembers. People don't remember what it was like when a number of people in school died from measles. And so, and nobody remembers how severe these diseases were. So we've all got used to this world where you are protected against these diseases that one time were massive killers and used to kill huge numbers of you. And of course, as I'm always saying to my first year, second year, third year medical students, as I show them the vaccination rates and what numbers would have looked like in the 20s and the 30s and what they look like now. I said, this is what we want. We don't want our babies to die from measles, diphtheria and everything else. But the problem is that nobody remembers. And that's where Clíona came in. And I said, this is your area, isn't it? Don't you go around collecting stories of people's memories? And she said, yes, absolutely, we can do this. So that's where the project kind of took off from very slowly. Very slowly. So we kind of pootled around the edges with huge help from James for a while, and Clíona getting bits of money to do this and bits of money to do that. And we created the pilot resource that she's going to talk you through. And the idea at the time was that I would write about the disease. And that's the other bit that I thought was missing, is that people don't really, they don't remember, for starters, that these were hugely crippling diseases, and if they didn't result in mortality, they definitely result in some kind of ongoing morbidity. But also that people don't have any understanding or comprehension. Maybe I could transmit that information and take my immunological and microbiological knowledge and kind of sell it with a story. So you put together a bit of fact about the organism and the disease in an accessible manner. I'm still not sure how successful this is going to be. And then you put it together with a bit of oral testimony, and suddenly you've created a whole new kind of concept and a whole new way of presenting this information. And ultimately, the dream at the time was really to kind of put something out there in the public sphere that might have a positive impact that people could go to from a health perspective point of view, or from an education point of view, a public health point of view. And now, 2 years later, we're in such a different world, right? So it's such a different environment. And we know that Ireland has the highest compliance of any country in Europe on uptake of vaccines. And suddenly we were selling what felt like a bit of a dead horse, certainly to funding agencies. I'll leave that over back to Clíona.
Thanks very much, Betty. No, yes. Thanks so much. So as you can see, we're already having fun with a little bit of back and forth. you know, in endless funding applications, Beth would be, but discourse, do we have to use that word? And I would be, yes, indeed we do, particularly. The narrative was the other one. So what we kind of do have to do is take very good note of all of the smaller and larger mutual incomprehensions that come up with work like this, because I think it's important to, particularly with the idea of the interdisciplinary research being supported more, lauded more, et cetera, to really look at what does happen when disciplines with very, very different viewpoints come together, and how can they work mutually beneficially, and what are the potential real pitfalls and stumbling blocks that may be incorporated into research without the interlocutors actually even noticing at the time. But enough of us talking. I'd like to now bring you to an excerpt, and navigating to it will give you an idea as well of the representational, the archival choices that we're making in the resource, as well as a bit of content. So I'm going to go in here to Voices and Memories, and I want to access a piece from John Kelleher, who was a quite well-known echo salesman in Cork. And this piece just came up when he was asked about his family. And I'm going to go into the account. You can see here we have an account on one page. We have an account just with a little log, just to pull people in. But in order to access it with the full transcript, we need to click into the item. And also, we can go to John Kelleher's full interview entry in the Cork Folklore Project online catalogue. And that's something that we really wanted to maintain throughout. There are all sorts of questions that come up when you are trying to present intensely qualitative material. And too often, oral testimony gets taken out of its context and presented as illustration rather than as something which needs to be given a bit of space and also taken on its own terms and in its own context. And this is something the tradition archives, of course, are very, very exercised with, particularly with the mass move to online dissemination. So we'll just listen to this, and I'll bring up the transcript as well.
They were good times.
Yeah, brilliant. So tell me a little bit about your family, actually. Like, were you from a big family?
Well, no, my mother was married twice.
Mm-hmm.
Her first husband was a bloke by the name of Freddie Murphy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Freddie was involved in newspapers. Now, he would be what you would call then a shopper. He was the man between the Echo office and the newsboys of the Times. He'd take the papers out, give them to him, collect money, get it back, he'd get his commission. Now, unfortunately, he died in 1924, a young man with TB. Now, the TB that was going at the time, there was different types of TB, but this particular TB that was rampant in the country at the time. It was better known to the people as consumption, because you couldn't understand what it done to the people. It just, if you got the TB, it just consumed you. So he died at the age of 24. So that left my mother with 4 children. Mm. So she had no choice. There was no welfare. The state was only 3 years old, and she had to take out selling newspapers to rear the 4 of them. Mm. Now, he died in February 24. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, she buried one of the boys in June 1924, and she buried the other boy in September 1924. Oh. Now, both of those lads, young fellas, died. One with diphtheria, the other with the croup. If I'm right, I don't think they exist today, but that was the time. So she was left with the 2 girls then. Mm-hmm. Then she eventually met my father, married my father, and there was 3 of us in that marriage. Mm-hmm. Well, she kept on the papers, and as I came my brother went to England when he was only about 17, so he wasn't very much involved with papers. But my sister and myself were involved in. I was with my mother all the time with the papers, up actually to the last day of her life. She was with papers. She died sudden in Christmas 1970. After we used to be down by the Coliseum, and she died sudden after coming up from the Coliseum.
So I'll return to this excerpt in a few minutes. But first, I'll actually briefly kind of address the issue from my perspective of who the resource is for. We do intend to keep this question open in best ethnographic style. Certainly, resource like this can be useful to public health communicators with whom we hope to collaborate in opening up conversations on public health and vaccination. There's a potential for its use in medical education in terms of introducing personal narratives as a means of communicating medical and community experience, and as a starting point for conversations about the value of listening within medical practice. With dissemination such as this, there's a really powerful response often from those with whom the experience described, the places named, the voices represented resonate. Strong response to the resource on our contributions page has come from people whose lives have been affected by infectious disease, those who've witnessed a similar impact intergenerationally, and from those involved in public health initiatives. As with all of the work of the Cork Folklore Project, the impetus is to listen and document narratives that people feel are important to share will shape the content and help form the audience for the resource. It may grow into a portal relating to the social history of public health in Ireland that links to a wide range of outputs and other resources relevant to the theme. But certainly iterative development through a cycle of repeated dissemination, consultation and collection will shape the resource. And you can't go out into the field without knowing that your path is going to be steered by the people that you talk to. And participation through contribution is a really important element of the potential impact. So just thinking back, we were due to start around a pilot round of interviewing in early 2020. And the advent of COVID-19 prompted a shift in approach. Face-to-face interviews weren't possible. And we were concentrating our resources on documenting the pandemic through Chronicles of COVID-19 collection. So myself and James, in designing the resource, in the early days, we concentrated on identifying and extracting relevant material already existing in the Cork Folklore Project sound archives and exploring the structure of the pilot resource. So our initial thoughts on creating catching stories were that we'd present material in a kind of mechanistic way, matching testimony of a disease with commentary on epidemiological relevance. Oh, how epidemiological rolls off all of our lips these days, and the history of its treatment in Ireland, a sort of a this plus that kind of approach. And we have indeed crafted separate pages here that relate to particular diseases on that model. However, it soon became apparent that human memory and experience and talk aren't necessarily that clear-cut. Being pushed to give more time to spontaneously occurring references in the Cork Folklore Project's audio archives of life history and place-based interviews reminded us of that. These references didn't necessarily bear in-depth witness to the experience of a particular disease. Think of Johnny Chris there. Instead, they testified to how family life trajectories or personal or community memoryscapes were fundamentally shaped by one or more of our target diseases. So I want to have a quick look as well at another piece a little like this. It's from Sister Marie Collins in an older interview.
Can you take that there because there's a little button you need to press the lads at home here.
Ah,
Yeah.
now we had already pressed it, but you,
Oh, really?
yeah, have a look.
Hold on a second now.
Great.
Sorry.
No, you're grand, thanks a mil.
Oh no, that's wrong.
Rinne.
No, I'm here now.
Oh, yeah, include computer sound.
Okay.
For Mila Vishishin,
Okay.
going Hannah, so
I know, but
Soiligum. Let me know
Teams love
if,
on pressing buttons.
Yes. So No.
Sure, we did that one.
Hit the button again, Clíona.
Oh, yes. Yeah. It doesn't like us.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
Sweet Jesus, will this?
The devil to go back to the 19th.
When will it be over? When will it be over? Okay, you folks at home, let us know if you can hear this.
Because I was blind and...
Oh, Gamlashkel, yeah, this one. So here, Sister Marie is talking about a memory that stood out, and she introduced it as that. She was saying, isn't it strange the way some memories you remember nothing before and nothing after, but this will stand out in your mind. And this just happened to be the memory that she introduced.
Isolated, really, and
Yes,
yes.
extraordinary. And we must have been in low babies. We had a high stool and a low stool, and there were the high infants and the low infants. And the one, the two of us got the measles. And I can still see this woman, Kitty O'Carroll. She had straight hair and a fringe, and a big bone top her head.
Yeah.
And when I went back after the measles, she was dead. She had died from the measles. And I can still see her little wee face. And I got measles, and I didn't get back when she died.
That's
So,
a very
you know,
lesson to learn.
things like
So I'll just stop it there. So short as they are, this kind of account might impact upon a listener in a much more immediate way and stay with them longer. Little Kitty O'Brien, what was her name? Kitty O'Brien with the bow on top of her head. Than in-depth accounts of experiences with infectious disease. And to me, anyway, the way in which they're spontaneously occurring in interviews carries a certain significance that we need to kind of think about a bit more. So in order to avoid this kind of material being unnecessarily shorn of its significance in a mechanistic testimony plus disease plus commentary presentation structure, we do need to make space for them and to figure out creative ways, perhaps, to allow them to breathe. As is the case for all the testimony, to honour the broader context in which it exists or was generated. So, creating and growing such a resource from a publicly available pilot is a great way of alerting those who don't normally work with audio testimony to its richness and its power to give listeners pause and kind of bring them to a topic in an unexpected manner. So being able to play testimony for people from other disciplines, journalists, potential contributors, is proving to be quite promising in terms of the development of the project. I'm going to start rounding up now with a few observations that highlight a few other elements of this resource. Coming at the theme from another direction, turning to public health initiatives, which is going to form a core part of the resource. For today, I'd just like to share a great child's eye account that came out of Kieran Murphy's work on Grattan Street Memories from Joe Scanlon. And this is here, getting the branding iron. I'll go into here so that we can access the full transcript and you can follow along. And I'll play this whole thing. It's 4 minutes and it's well worth it. But again, if anybody at home can't hear, okay, but you never do know. You never do know with Teams. Right. So you can sit back and I'll follow along in the
Then you go and sit down, regardless what would be, you just go and sit down, and there was no such thing as jumping the queue because they were like church seats, the benches. You just slide up one every time. Oh. And eventually you get to your GP. You naturally, my mother used to always be with me.
Oh.
And
this one doesn't have
this particular morning, I didn't realise that we were going for the TB injections, which we call them afterwards the branding iron, because 55 years later I still have the scar on my arm, right? But what happened actually that morning was how I remember so well is my father brought me. It was all my mother brought me to a GP now, etc. But this particular morning, my father, the front entrance to the dispensary at that time was on Grattan Street. Beautiful building, as I said now, but there was such a crowd there, we were actually out in the street with, I presume, 20 children in front of me. not realising there was another 60 or 80 in the building before me as well. So every child we seen coming out was either in a state of shock, eyes, mouth wide open, or they were screaming their freaking head out, right? And we were looking at this. There wasn't one came out smiling or etc. No. So, being the brave guy I am, every step closer I took, I was losing weight, right? With fear. Because I still didn't know what was ahead of me. Eventually we got in the front door, and then it was like benches, like in the church seats, and you got your seat and you go along the rotation and etc. We do get closer and closer for the branding iron, as we call it. And every person, every child that came out of that room was like someone in a different planet, right? From the fear and the pain, that I didn't realise the pain was so severe either. Next we were getting closer and closer. And I'd say now I had 3 or 4 to go. And at this stage now, I was only 8 years of age now. Now I'm open for correction as regards times, etc. But I was about 8 years of age. And I was a skinny runt. And by the time I got in there, I was after losing another 2 stone with fear. In with me anyway, and I remember I couldn't tell you which doctor it was now, but this thing came out, and it was like a branding iron for cattle. It was like a bolt, about 6 inches long, and it looked as if he loaded kind of cartridges into it. And the needles 55 years ago weren't as thin, believe me. These things look as thick as a refill of a biro, like small nails, we say. And I think there was 6 or 8 of them at the one whip. So now I was, if you asked me my name, I couldn't tell you. I was scared stiff. But I remember my father catching my left wrist and arm and really squeezing me tight, because the GP told them, don't let him move. And then all of a sudden there's this sudden shock of a thump went into your system, like as if you were electrocuted. But then it took another, it felt like an hour to me, it took about another 10 seconds for him to discharge the liquid, which I think was for TB and, oh God, what else was there? Polio and all these things were involved that time. Most children in all over got it actually. So coming out anyway, I really felt like I was screaming as well, the same as the next guy. It was, we could have made a record, I'd say, out of the 60 children screaming at one time, you know. I came out of there and I went over. I remember the father bringing me for ice cream somewhere. And God almighty, I tell you, I'll always remember it. That, and we were delighted a couple of years afterwards, not too long after now, we were told this thing was coming up again. So I'd have been probably 12-ish now at the stage. And I made my mind up at 12, Ma'am, Dad, I am not going there again. But actually it was sugar lumps they gave us after. The sugar, when you were eating it was beautiful, but when it went down, when it decided to work on you, oh, there was a taste in your mouth for about 3 days after.
So you can see here, we're not just dealing in information. You know, there's information there, but to get an understanding of what it felt like to go through that process and this wonderful performance, to get an understanding of what it was like to have the public health officials come to your household and want to burn everything and give you no support for replacing it because there was TB in the house. That's a different kind of way of understanding public health advances and public health developments in Ireland. And it's, I suppose, it ties a little bit back into the idea of recognizing that there are different kinds of knowledge, and there will always be struggles over which of different kinds of knowledge get recognized, that are very much rooted in ongoing structures of power and negotiation of that power. So just 1 or 2 other things that I want to say. I suppose themes that emerge that we'll be keeping to the fore are, that a place, stigma and silence, particularly relating to TB, the power of the public health officials and their interaction with particularly working class life girls. Long-term presences and absences in households and the objects that were associated with these experiences. So just bring one object up here that came our way. It was a memorial card that was in Jim Morrish's family memorial card book that he was going through, and it came our direction when we realized that these two brothers, 16 and 23 years of age, died within, I think, a fortnight of each other of Spanish flu. We went and checked out the records, and indeed it was true. So you've got this intergenerational memory being passed down through families on these and these objects coming our direction. Other things, when speaking to people about TB, polio and other diseases, certain sanatoria and hospitals, places and people, particular doctors and places were referred to frequently and with a certain kind of familiarity as elements that have played a central role in the lives of individuals and families and whole communities. And they were household names at certain times. The ubiquity of the experience of long journeys undertaken by families on public transport to visit those on long stays in institutions, sanatoria or with polio, and became apparent, including the ways that these visits became part of life cycle rituals. And here I'd like to go in through TB and down to an interview that Susan O'Sullivan did as a third-year folklore student last year with her parents. And they spoke about the trip on their wedding day to see his brother, who was in a sanatorium for a very long time. Here he is playing pitch and putt on Heatherside, in Heatherside Sanatorium. Anybody recognize the other person in the photo? We think it's the poet Sean O'Riordan, with whom he was friends in the sanatorium, and the publication of whose diaries actually by Padraig O'Lehan in DCU, in which he closely chronicles decades of experiences with TB in coming years be of great interest in health humanities. So objects as carriers of family memory came to the fore. This was a leather wallet hand-tooled by the interviewee's brother, again in a sanatorium. Whether they be these photos or the objects or the memorial cards. So just before I finish up and invite Jamie to say a few words on the future of the project, one final observation, I suppose, in writing funding applications and so on, I found myself describing this as a cultural heritage project. It is on a cultural heritage platform, and it's both contributing to and drawing on cultural heritage or tradition archives. I'm using the term cultural heritage somewhat reluctantly. What is it anyway? But falling back on it in order to highlight the sector's particular set of archival, long-term, multi-format, resource-orientated and public-facing sensibilities, in contrast to, for example, history, social science, health sciences, science communication. And this is important for me to assert somewhat implicitly, I suppose, through the use of cultural heritage, left, right, and centre, because although this project is ostensibly about creating an online database of curated content, that's by no means the whole story for us. It'll lead to a long-term archival collection of testimony and images, and to the relationships that come out of archival collaboration with contributors, whether this be individuals, survivor advocacy groups, other repositories of testimony, colleagues across the health sciences and science communication, health communication. So as such, for me, the project isn't just about content, it's about also form and the handling of content. What's the significance when dealing with this theme or area of research of presenting vernacular narratives, talk, personal objects? What does it contribute to have the audio rather than just text? And what do the understandings and conventions of tradition archives regarding archival content, dissemination, and making space quite deliberately for intensely qualitative audio material have to contribute to the broader question of the intersection of individual, societal, and scientific experience and knowledge? In some ways, for me, in any case, these are the questions we'll be exploring in the coming 12 months as we really come to grips with this generation and curation of testimony of experience in this rich and challenging area of research. So just to finish up, I'd like to call on James Furey to say a few words about the future. I have come out, Jamie, and when you go back in again, don't forget to click the button.
So, okay. Thank you, Clíona. That was great. To be reminded about what we're doing. So, I suppose I was hired here as a kind of at the initial stages of this, as a kind of a digital expertise person that I've been kind of working on different variety of projects for the Cork Folklore project and the Department of Folklore and Ethnology for the last few years, primarily making the catalogues available for both. So, but kind of also in the last 5-6 years, I've been a collector of kind of social history and, you know, lives. My main project would have been on the Ballyfihan development in the 50s and 60s, and kind of the social aspects of that, moving from tenements in the countryside into the corporation development. And I kind of like a lot of folklore and occupational lore that I would collect along that. But I had a massive blind spot, and that blind spot was kind of the health perspective of people in these situations. And I don't know, it might have been a conscious decision that I made to these projects to steer away from that, because I thought it maybe it's too kind of sticky a subject to go down when you're kind of trying to keep things light about in these situations. But a couple of years, like it wasn't until my colleague Kieran Murphy, who Clíona had mentioned, started working in conjunction with the HSC on those projects in the orthopedic and in Grattan Street, that I started thinking, oh, I really missed a trick there, looking back over those kind of the project that I did about living in tenements and stuff like that. So I started thinking this, and around that time was that Beth and Clíona had kind of were trying to right the wrongs of vaccine uptake, and they got on to me to see if I could kind of help them out getting some sort of platform online, you know, which I jumped at because you know, why not? Then something happened, you know, and that happened, and it put a kind of a kibosh on a lot of our work. But what it did help further kind of my experience in kind of collecting of health-based narratives and stuff was being involved with the Chronicles of COVID project. So again, it kind of it was more strings to my bow instead of kind of compiling questionnaires that are going out and interviewing. So there was always kind of learning curve around that, and everybody, as we all know, is expert in public health and epidemiology at this point for the last few years. So that I'm catching up with some people, whereas people had, you know, we're all at a level. So yeah, that happened, and you know, this is just kind of built on that knowledge base, and so we've come, as Clíona said, I won't go on much more about this, but that's the project. Here we are, we're done, basically. You know, like it's here, it's ready, it's a fully functioning project. Thank you, SFI. We don't need the funding. You know, not really. But like, where we are with this, as Clíona explains, we've kind of touched off the CFP archive and the UCC Folklore and Ethnology archive. kind of really drawing from that Grattan Street was more so because that kind of coincided with us talking about vaccines, and Kieran was able to go out and get that great story from Joe. And also through the Chronicles project, we had a volunteer in the Cork Folklore project, Pauline Matthews, who does brilliant work for us. She started kind of just, giving us these little audio diaries and sometimes video diaries of just of her experience through the pandemic. She's a retiree. She's great, does great work, but like her life was put on standstill like everybody else's, and it was really great insight to that. And Pauline then had an experience with TB, and she gave a good account of that as well. So like we kind of drew on that, and it's a really powerful account. So that's and obviously with Beth stuff. So that's great, and then we have that, and we're done. But so where do I go from here? So the next step really is to just really get deep with interviewing, and there's a kind of two-pronged approach to the interviewing. So there's the interviewing of public health professionals to kind of see how best that maybe they could use it as a means of communication to getting their message out there, and that will kind of shape aspects of how it's going to be. Not everything, I don't think, but like it will have a good influence. So there's that side of things, but then it's the kind of the ethnographic style of interviewing that we're going to have to undertake, which is going to be huge. Although it was got a good email this morning, Clíona did, which kind of hit so many great topics of a guy I know from you also. This is great. So the ball is rolling, and it's good. So like what we're interested in, as Clíona has mentioned, the people whose lives were affected, public health officials and stuff that were on the ground, so to speak, during these times of infectious diseases, and kind of. So you're creating this data with the public health professionals, but then you're creating this content and stuff with on the other side. So this and like the outcomes of which will be varied, and as Clíona had kind of mentioned as well, nothing is kind of set in stone as well at this point. So there's going to be. There's going to be podcasts, there's going to be long form interviews, there's going to be talks, everything's going to be on this resource. How is it going to look the same as what it is there? Probably not. It's kind of functionality issues, aesthetic issues, all that stuff is going to come into play. And so like keep checking in is what I say, because over the next 12 months there will be great things that happen here. I'm conscious now of time, so there's a slide missing. Oh no way. Jeez. I had a lovely slide, and it kind of tied in with what Clíona had said, and I don't know where it's gone. Oh, here we go. About public health people coming, or the council coming and evacuating from their house because of TB and whatnot. It was like whatever. So this is an interview that was done in 1996. By a student in the folklore and ethnology, and he interviewed a lady. The project was on rent collecting and tenants and collectors, and it's an hour-long interview. And there's like so many other interviews when they kind of touch up these things. It's just kind of a fleeting bit, but it's so strong. And she mentioned this lane and the lane. She's from the lane next to this lane. This is Slattery's Lane in Blackpool. She was from Green Lane. Where they would be now, or where they were, is where the flyover at the end of Thomas Davis Street, where Dunstores is kind of acts on. That's where the kind of area that really. So her name is Dolly, and I'll finish on this because there's not much. But this kind of does show perception. This is her account of the houses being demolished and why, and her kind of take on that. So.
And my husband and 2 kids. You see?
You stayed there then, is now?
We stayed there then, and I came up here 64 with my brother.
Why did you come up here then?
Because the corporation were knocking down.
They were knocking down, yeah. So, like at the time, they were knocking down. How were they knocking down the houses then? They were still back societies, were they?
They were, yeah. The corporation were on living houses. And I said, go to anyone. I said, at the houses and find out how many TB cases. I said, will you get all of the lanes combined? And I said, you get maybe 2, maybe 3.
Yeah.
And my own sister was one of them. And I said, what is more? I said, go through any, I said, of your own housing estate. And I said, go through one terrace. And how many TB cases will you get? You get a hell of a lot more. I said, and all the ladies know, my God, there was, and the noon, my God, they were all big, able-bodied people, born and reared in those days. There was fine people came out of them. As I said from the time, we got no cases of polio, so I went to rampant in the city, which we didn't either.
Which is a good sign of the houses.
You know, there was only one suspected case out of Blackpool, and it wasn't confirmed.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
they had nothing, they didn't know what to talk about, really.
Were you forced out in the end?
Well, we had to leave. They were just, they took over the houses.
Yeah. And did they get compensation or anything?
Oh, I wouldn't think so. No, the girl next door here.
Sue saying that this is the only this I did come in prepared, but the computer always been out. So basically what she was saying there was that they came because they evacuated the 2 lanes because of TB. She said there was no TB in the lanes except her sister and maybe 1 or 2 other people. No, that's kind of funny that her sister had it, and she didn't think of it as too much. But she said if you go to any of the corporation estates, that's where you'll find TB. It's rampant up there. We didn't have polio down here either. There was 1 case of polio in Blackpool and it wasn't confirmed. And that was her. And she said then that compensation for the houses, that she was living in rented accommodation, so they got no compensation. They did get housed, but they didn't get any compensation. The lady across the road in this lane, Slattery's Lane, she got £100, the equivalent of £100 for her house, whereas her sister across the street from her only got 5 shillings. So there was no, so who it was, what it was, there's a difference. And that lady, you could see, like, her sister had TB. She didn't go on about the TB. She went on about the effect of losing the house and whatnot. So there's all these things, as Clíona was saying earlier. So thank you for coming and thank you for listening. And that's the website, catchingstories.org. And if you'd like to contribute, you can email me at jamesfury at UCC.fury at UCC or else catching stories at Folklore. Corkfolklore.org. So thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Jamie.
No problem.
And Sheila was a thought we Margaret and Beth had to leave earlier on. So, but what a wonderful initiative, what a wonderful project, and it's so important. I think we've seen it's so important that these stories be connected. Our memories are very short. We forget about former memories, and so it's very important, very timely, very relevant to our times. This kind of work goes on, and there would always be accounts from above, if you like, that speak of such events. But it's wonderful to have the ordinary person give their account of these events too. It reminds me of something that Frank Hart said about our song tradition. He said, those who power write the history and those who suffer write the songs. We're listening to those who are suffering here, and it's very, very important that their voices be documented, and a wonderful job has been done on that by the Cork Folklore Project for the city of Cork over the last 25 years.